We have it all. We missed you last week.
Thank you, but I was so pleasantly surprised at the recordings. I started listening to last week's Shiur. It's on the Young Israel webpage. You can find all the recordings of every session.
It came out well.
Yeah, it was perfect. The
Wonderful.
quality was just perfect. Thanks to Scott.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're on Yudalad Amud Aleph, near the bottom. We're actually starting 3 lines from the bottom, but just to back up a second. So we are talking about Abaya was introducing the question of selling a field and then having the controversy that happens after selling a field when a Baal Chov comes and takes it away from the buyer. So the buyer then has rights. And so Abaya introduced us to this concept last week. And we said, firstly, that the seller can intervene on behalf of the buyer to the third person. In other words, he has standing, is what we called it. He has standing. And the Gemara says that if he gave him achrayus, if he gave him a pledge, of course, he steps in. But the Iked Amre says, even without achrayus, even if he didn't give him a pledge, where he could just stand back and say, you bought it at your own risk. So we introduced this concept of tarumos, that he doesn't want to have complaints lasting against him. It's a bad thing that people will complain that he was a cheater, he didn't do right by him. So the chiddush is that even by tarumas, where there is no achrayus, that he still has standing. That's what the Gemara wanted to introduce. Okay, now we're going to start from 3 lines from the bottom. Another chiddush of Abaya. So the Gemara says, "Va'omer Abaya." Abaya also says, "Reuven shemachem sadeh l'Shimon." Same situation. Reuven sells a field to Shimon. Shelo ba'achrayus, without achrayus. There's no pledge, so he has no shibud to make up the lost if the sale doesn't backfires or whatever. V'yotzolo asikin, and protests emerge. Say Rashi, asi orin kamoshi is ashku imo. There are complaints that the seller was selling the land improperly. The seller was selling the land improperly. So there are complaints against the seller. So the Gemara tells us, ad shelo hichzik ba, as long as the buyer. So now we're not talking about where the sale went through, and now we have to deal with the third party, with pledges or whatever. So he sold them below achrayus. There was no achrayus, there was no pledge, and then complaints came through against the seller that the seller did something improper and he couldn't have sold it. Says the Gemara, ad shelo hichzik ba, as long as the buyer didn't make a chazaka yet, okay, to now on Yudalad Amud Beis on the top, yochel lachzor bo. As long as he didn't make a chazaka, then he can back out. The deal has not been consummated, he can back out. It says Rashi, yochel lachzor bo, ub'shelo nosen mos. He didn't yet pay for the land. He didn't make a chazaka on the land. So basically, he's not tethered to the land. He can say, you know what? I don't like the fact that people are protesting the sale. I'm backing out. And he's allowed to do it. However, mishehichzik ba, if he already made a chazaka, we'll see what that means in a minute. Eni yachal lachzor bo, says Rashi. Eni yachal lachzor bo va'afilu lo nosen mos. This is very important. He made a chazaka, whatever that chazaka is. He didn't yet give him the money. He made the chazaka before giving the money. Then he can no longer back out. Eni yochel lachzor bo, says Rashi, va'afilu lo nosen mos shehakarka niknes b'chazaka, because the land was already koneh by the buyer by doing the act of chazaka. V'hamos al zeh milveh. So in other words, what Rashi is telling us is that if you made a chazaka and then you want to back out, you cannot. I didn't give him the money. He says, that's incidental. The money is a loan. We consider the money that he pays him a loan. So therefore, the loan can't undo the transaction. The transaction was completed through the chazaka. Now we're going to see why that's critical in a minute. But so that's the pshat in the Gemara. Any achalagzabo because he made a chazaka. And why is this valid? Remember, this is without achrayas. There's no pledge here. The omalei, because the seller can tell the buyer, chaysa de katre savlas v'kablas. This is an expression. You bought a bag of knots. What does that mean? In other words, just like a bag of knots, you don't know what's inside because the whole bag is knotted. So you don't know what you're buying. Here too, when you're buying without a chrayas, you're buying something that you don't know what you're buying, but you bought it. It's almost like a grab bag. It's like a surprise bag. Whatever you got, that's what you got.
It's
So
like
by buying it without a chrayas, you're taking a chance.
right.
It's like a bag of knots.
It's like we say you bought a cat in a sack. You know, you don't-
Right, exactly. Yes, Jay, you were saying something?
Is this the same as when we sell chametz to the rabbi? We do a chazaka, but we don't actually get money. We don't do anything else.
No. It's not the same. It's not the same because here we're actually making a sale. Again, by chametz, it's a whole different story because
That's Kenyan.
yeah, I mean, what you're doing here is you're making a transaction, but you don't know what you're transacting. You're kind of transacting blindly because when you sell, I mean, there could be so many problems associated with the land, with the deal, and you're basically saying, I accept it the way it is, and whatever happens is going to happen. So you have no backup. So when all of a sudden there is a problem, you're left out in the cold. You have nowhere to turn. You can't get anything in return for the property that's being taken from you. In that respect, he says that you're buying a bag of knots because you don't know what you're buying. Therefore, the word to the wise, don't make a transaction like this. But
Okay.
what we see from this Gemara is the following, that once you make a chazaka, the transaction is complete. He didn't give him money. The teretz is the money is incidental. Yes, of course, the money is critical to the deal, but it's incidental to the purchase. The purchase is completed by the chazaka, and the money is a halva, is a loan, and that will be this really the core of what we're going to discuss today is what that means and how that happens. But
A question.
Yeah.
And I imagine the Gemara will get to this somewhere, but I'll just jump ahead, I guess, which is that then this could have serious implications. Then let's say there was a boar on the property or something, and that somebody got injured, that now the fact of who technically owns it, even though he hasn't given the money, he hasn't started farming it or anything else, would be very important.
right, but there is no. This is not an ambiguous issue. It's his.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. So that's why it's important. Right.
It belongs to the buyer. No question it belongs to the buyer. He made a chazaka. What the Gemara wants to tell us, the chiddush is that you didn't even have to give him the money. That the money is not what will clinch the deal. The chazaka is what clinches the deal. Now let's take a quick look to the next line. And what is the chazaka? So what did he do here that makes the chazaka? Says the Gemara, Mechi Daish Mitzri. He walked the property. He just walked the property, and that makes it his. So Rashi explains what that means. In other words, by walking the circumference, the perimeter of the property, so he's kind of like pushing down the dirt of the land, and he's strengthening the fence. That's the expression. In other words, so what do? You walk the property, you tamp it down, and by tamping it down, you're showing that it's yours because the fence around it, again, presuming there's a fence here, the fence around it, when you tamp it down, you make the dirt more firm, and the idea is that the fence becomes strengthened. That's the idea of chazaka. So, but nevertheless, he makes the chazaka, and then when he gives him the money, it's a halva. It's a loan. Okay, you don't even have to count that as being the sort of the makah b'patish, the final step in the transaction. Okay, That's the Gemara. Now, the Ikeda Amre, there is an Ikeda Amre here also. And the Ikeda Amre says, Afilu ba'achrayis nami. What does this mean? Even when the seller gave the buyer achrayis, means he gave him a pledge, nami, he also cannot back out if he makes a chazaka. Why is this an issue? Why is it a question? Says Rashi, Ikeda Amra Afilu ba'achrayis, afagav the sof olahoder. Remember, with achrayis, if there's a problem, he owes him to return the money. So the chari, you would ask, if he owes him to return the money, if the guy backs out, give him the money. It's a done deal. I mean, you're going to have to pay him if something happens here to this property. So if someone comes and protests, so what if he made a chazaka? There's achrayis here. Give him the money back. Says Rashi, no. The seller can force him below motza omahu, and the buyer cannot say, "Hold the sofik l'shalimli ma'osai." At the end, if something happens, you're going to pay me my money. Hashta de biyodi akavim. In other words, pay me the money now and let's get this over with. No, why? Because we'll see in a minute. There's intervening factors, but so the seller can say to him, "We have a transaction, and the transaction has to go through." Why? Because you made a chazaka. Even though I pledged ba'achrayis that I will cover you if something happens. Why can he do this? Says the Gemara, bring me the receipt from Bezdin that the land was confiscated, and then I will pay you. Rashi, when the third person comes in, biyazaku badin, and he takes it with bedin, and the judge will write a shtar Torah, a collection document. Shebedin torko mimcha bishvili bova shalmcha kol kamad the law amount to bedin eno yoramehem. I'm not worried about them. Remember, we said that there's circumstances where if a person sells. Remember, we said at the end of last week that if a person sells pieces of land, and then there is someone who comes to collect, he collects from the last first, right? Last in, first out. So if he had sold this fellow the land earlier, he may never get to him, because if anything has to be collected, it may be collected from other property that he sold. So this seller doesn't want to return the money, doesn't want to return the money. He says, this is a good sale. When and if you get a shtar bezdin that says collect, then you come to me and you'll have every right to collect. But right now you have no right to collect. So what the Gemara is telling us, that even ba'achrayis, even with achrayis, when he gave him a pledge, when a person makes a chazaka, that chazaka takes control unless it's undone by the bezdin. The bezdin can undo it by issuing a document that says you are allowed to go, that you can go back to your seller and you can collect from him. So okay, that's what Abai is telling us. So in other words, you have Ikeda Amri both ways. In the first case in the Gemara last week, it flip-flopped from achrayis to ein achrayis, and here the Gemara is talking about ein achrayis, and the Ikeda Amri said, I feel about achrayis, you can collect, you can't retrace, you can't retract, except if you get this shtar. All right. So to sum up, the chazaka makes the deal happen, and depending on what the circumstance is, with achrayis, without achrayis, he can get the property back, and the money is only incidental to the deal because we consider the money to be a loan. Okay. Now we're going to focus on this question of the loan, because this is really where the critical issues arise. Okay, so that's the end of that piece. Now, Itmar, so the Gemara learns as follows. Hamoches sada lechavero, v'nimtza she'ena shelo. If a person sells a field, Reuven sells a field to Shimon, and it turns out that the land never belonged to Reuven. Rashi, she'ena shelo, shelo hoysa shel moche, she'yikazula biyado. Let's say he forged the document. He forged the sales document and to say this land belongs to Reuven. Goes to Shimon, says, I have this beautiful piece of land to sell you. Shimon says, sure, I'll buy it. He gives him a good price. He buys it. And it turns out that Reuven was never the owner. Vahanigzal, Levi, who really owns the land, bought, and he takes it from Shimon's hands. Okay. So now, what's the sequence of events? Reuven sells it to Shimon. Shimon pays him money. Turns out Reuven was never the seller. He took the money improperly. Levi takes the land from Shimon. Shimon is out of luck, except he goes back to Reuven and says, I want my money back. Okay, that's the scenario. Now, in the meantime, Shimon improved the land. He worked the land, he tilled the land, he started reaping produce. It was a regular piece of land, and he improved the land. So what happens now to the improvements? Rav Omar, Rav says, Yesh lo ma'os v'yesh lo shvach. He gets the money for the land and the money for the improvements. Rashi, Yesh lo lokeach min hamocher ma'os. He gets the money, the $1,000, whatever that he paid for the land. V'yesh lo shvach. And he gets the improvements. What does Rashi say? Let's say he fertilized it or he put a fence around it. So he made the property better. Okay. Kodim shahotzi nigzal miyado. Gova lokeach min hamocher. The lokeach can collect from the seller shevach. Okay. Pretty clear, right? Okay. Stop a minute. Do you have any questions on this? Okay. He goes to the seller and he says, I improved the land. It's now worth 1,100. You got to pay me 1,100.
Well, I didn't ask you to improve it.
I'm sorry?
The landowner can say, I didn't ask you to improve it.
I don't hear you well. Say it a little louder.
The landowner can say, I didn't ask you to improve it.
Okay, but he's going to the mocher now. He's going to the seller, the gazlan.
Right, Rabbi. The benefit is actually inuring to the original owner, the one who had it stolen. He's the one who should be paying for it.
Good. You see, that's a good chap. So he should go to the. Oh, why is he going to the gazlan? The gazlan repaid him for the land. He improved the land. He should go to the mocher. He should go. I mean, to the nigzal. He should go to Levi and say, Levi, I improved your land. You should pay me. Right?
Yeah, but then to Chaim's point, the owner never asked him to do it. So why should he pay?
Because the Gemara says, Mitzvah Shem, a lot later when we get to it, the Gemara says that if you improve land without being asked, you're at least allowed to get the value of the improvement or your money. The Gemara says that. You're right. It's a good kasha, but the Gemara says that if I go onto your land and I'm not invited, and I start working your land and I make your land better, I can go to you and have a taina. You got to pay me for the improvement. So you're going to say, but I never asked you.
So if I see you at an intersection and I take and I spray your windshield and clean it, and you owe me a buck.
If I'm coming out of the Lincoln Tunnel and a guy is accosting me with a squeegee.
That's what Scott just said.
Does he have Titus?
So is that an improvement? The question is, did he improve it or, yeah, it depends.
No, but again, it's a good kasha. But the Gemara is saying by land, when you improve land, the land has lasting benefits. If you do the squeegee, the next rain is going to make it dirty again. He's not going to really get a benefit. But by land, says the Gemara says by land, if you improve somebody's land even without his permission, then l'chayra, his land is worth more. He should give you something for it.
Not really, though. Not really. The next tornado will just knock down the fences, and the next season the fertilizer won't be good anymore.
Yeah, good kasha.
Bottom line is, you didn't ask him. You didn't ask him to do it.
Are you saying that the fact that it was improved automatically? I mean, what's Gemara's logic? You were not invited. You had no business going in there.
Correct.
Why should anybody?
But the Gemara makes such a statement that if you're not authorized to do something and you do it the shvach for the benefit of somebody, remember, we say that if someone gets a benefit, he would accept it. Remember, we have this Gemara many times. So if I, without your knowledge or without your asking, do something for you, then it's a schus. As long as it's a schus, you're allowed to do it. So
It
if
would
it's a
seem
schus,
that, it would seem that the owner who's getting the benefit has to agree that it's a schus.
but
Somebody
he
goes
doesn't.
and builds,
No,
puts a
no.
barn in the middle of the yard. I say, I didn't want that over there.
Right, no, but you're right. As
Well-
long as he considers it as schus, if he doesn't consider it schus, you're absolutely right. But normally speaking, if someone fertilizes a piece of land, that's something that he would normally do, and it cost him $100 to do it. He'll say, you know what? You're right. I benefited. I'll give you some money. In other words, the Gemara the Gemara says one of two things. You give him the lesser of the money he spent or the value that it increased. So if he spent $500 to increase it, but the real value was only $100, he has to give him $100, not the 500. But the Gemara says that it's a zechus and zachar la'adam shalom lefan. That's the right. That's the general. Yeah, we can say what happens later: tornadoes, rains, all these other things. But on a plain surface, we're saying that zachar la'adam shalom lefan. So let's just say.
Wait, Rabbi.
So
Rabbi.
that's why Yale's kasha is a good kasha. You go to the mocher. Why are you going to the Goslin? The Goslin didn't benefit from it. The actual underlying owner benefited from it. So take a look in Rashi. Rashi anticipates that question. Take a look. The im tomar, the Rashi v'yesh lo shvach, right? So if he improves the land with a fence or with fertilizer, fake Rashi, the im tomar, and if you're going to ask, hanigzel yitin hashvach, that the nigzel, the real owner of the land, got the benefit. Shahari hishivu karka, because he improved his land. So why is he going to the Goslin? He should go to the owner of the land. Says the Gemara, Mishubech Tonsha Goslam, Mishubechas, Bikshifa Biyad HaGoslin. What happened is that the Goslin, when he took the land, he did something to the land to devalue the land. In other words, when he stole the land, when he forged the document and stole the land, it was worth $1,000. Under his excellent guidance, the value of the land went down to $900. Now he sold it to Shimon. Shimon started working the land, and he brought it back up to $1,000. So when the Nigzal, when Levi comes and takes the land, did he get a benefit? No benefit. He got his original land. It's the Goslin who got the benefit, because the Goslin sold him a piece of land that was really worth only $900, and since the buyer improved it, that's why Rashi says he goes to the Goslin to collect his improvement, because he improved it over what the Goslin sold him. So Taka, if there was a benefit to the mocher, there would be a different circumstance, because the Gemara says under those circumstances, the original owner did get a benefit. Rashi is saying here there was no benefit because it devalued in the hands of the Goslin, and the buyer only improved it to the value of what it was before the Goslin stole it. Okay, that's an aside, but it's an interesting point, because now we understand what again, Zachar L'Adam Shelo B'Fanav, that you can do this without permission and still get some kind of a benefit. Okay, so but anyway, Rob says Yesh Lo Mos V'Yesh Lo Shvach. Back to the Gemara, Shmuel Omer. Shmuel says no. Mos Yesh Lo Shvach Ein Lo. He gets the money, but he doesn't get the shvach. Rashi, Lekamen Mefarish Tama. Later on, we're going to explain. Okay, so now we have a machlokes Rav and Shmuel as to whether or not, if the buyer improves the land, whether he can collect, in this case from the Goslin, whether he can collect for the improvement. Rav says yes, Shmuel says no. All right, so now our focus is on Shmuel. Says the Gemara, Boy minei Rav Huna. So the Talmidim came to Rav Huna, and they said, what's Pshat in Shmuel? What's Pshat in Shmuel? What does Shmuel mean when he says Shvach Elo? Pirish lo as a Shvach. Okay, Ruvain sells the land to Shimon. Ruvain is the Goslin. Ruvain sells the land to Shimon, And when he sells the land to Shimon, he says in clear words, if you improve the land, and remember, it's with achrayas, it's with the pledge. And he says, if you improve the land, I'm going to give you your improvements. That's what Reuven says to Shimon. I'm going to give you your improvements. So he makes it very clear, Shimon, you want to work the land. If there's a problem here, I'll cover you. So it says the Gemara like this. Ma'u Tama de Shmuel. Why does Shmuel say you don't get of the shvach? Mishum delo pirish shavcha. Is it because he didn't enunciate that he would give him the value of the improvement? V'hacha hapirish. And here he did enunciate, so he should get it. Is that what we're saying? Oh, or not? Dilma Tama de Shmuel. Shmuel says you never get it. It has nothing to do with pirish. What does it have to do with? Given the lesle karka mechze karibis. Wait a minute. We said before that when a person makes a chazaka, he owns the land even if he didn't pay the money. Why? Because the money is considered a loan. What's the halacha on a loan? I lend you $1,000. What are you supposed to give me back? $1,000. If I'm going to collect the shvach of $100, it's going to be ribis. It's going to be interest. Because when someone sees the transaction that I'm giving you $1,000 and you're giving me back 1,100, that's ribis. So on the face of it, Shmuel says you can't collect the shvach because it's ribis. That's a tremendous chiddush. All right, so let's look at Rashi. Pirish lo es hashvach. So if the seller, the gazlan here, if the seller shemacholo, when he sold it, hisna im yatrufu miyodcha, he makes up with him that if someone will take this land from you, ashalem lecho es hashevach, I will pay the shvach, I will pay the improvement. Mahu. So now says Shmuel, given the lesle karka, ho ve'ein karka zu shalo, since the land is not his, nimtza she'ein kan shum mecher, there was never a sale of land. V'hamos milva etzlo, and the money that he gave him was just a loan. Ukeshemishalem yosim imashe notl mechzik karibis. Then it looks like ribis, because he's returning to him more than what he gave him, because it's a strict halvah here.
But that's you said it's the appearance of ribis, but in fact there's no ribis here. Nobody really made an agreement to pay back more. And
okay, so you make a very good point, and let's hold it because the Gemara is going to talk about that, because it's mechze. You're right; it appears to be ribis. It's not really ribis, but it appears to be ribis. But even something that appears to be ribis, the Gemara is saying here, you shouldn't do it because someone is going to look and is going to see you're collecting ribis. Now they're going to have a taina on you. Not only you're a goslin, but you're collecting ribis on top of it. You're a double bad guy. So that's the kasha here in the Gemara. So Shmuel is saying you can't collect from the shvach because it will appear to be ribis, right? That's the chiddush here. Okay, that's the kasha. So this was the kasha that they brought to Rav Huna. And so what's the answer? Omale. So Rav Huna answered. First he said yes, you're right, it's ribis. Then v'lav, v'rafa biyadeh, and he was in a dilemma. So Rashi in v'lav, chila ama in, it is ribis, because of ama lav, rafa hoya hadava biyadeh shlo hoya yodeh, tama shel dava yofet. He really didn't know the answer. Rav Huna wasn't able to figure out and say it is ribis or it isn't ribis. So we're in a kasha. Okay. So now that's our status at this point, is that according to Shmuel, you cannot collect shvach because it appears to be ribis. Dr. Gemara Itmar. We learned, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, Mos Yeshlo, Shvach Ein Lo. In other words, Rav Huna may have had a doubt, but Rav Nachman says in the name of Shmuel, Mos Yeshlo, he gets the money, Shvach Ein Lo. Afal Pi Shepirish Lo Es HaShvach, even though he announced when he sold it to him, I'm going to pay you for the Shvach, meaning that he dispelled the notion that there's something improper here, because he says, I'm going to pay you for the Shvach. Matama, given the Karka Ein Lo, Scham Osav Omed Venotel. So this is a big chiddush to us, that even though when he sold it, he said to him with certainty, I'm selling you this land. If for some reason you lose the land, I'm paying you for your improvement. So Jay, to your point, it would seem that he already said at the very beginning, this transaction includes money to come later, possibly, right? You would think he would dispel any notion of ribbis by saying that. Says Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel, no, you can't dispel that notion, because that since there was no transaction, there was no sale, and it was a halva, we're not allowing it because it appears to ribbis. So that's a big chiddush, by the way, that even though he said in so many words, I'm paying you for the shvach, so he should dispel any question that could come later on. Shmuel says, Afal Pi, even though I'm not going to allow it because it's too close to ribbis, and we want to create a fence around this whole issue and say that there should be no even appearance of ribbis. Someone he didn't hear it and he watches and he sees, he gives him 1,000, he gets back 1,100. He's going to say the guy was a ganef, whatever. So Shmuel is being very, very strict here, and he's saying no, under no circumstance are we going to allow this.
But if nobody is aware that it's a loan, how could there be ribbis involved? How could there be an appearance of ribbis if the party?
Because they know that the land didn't belong to Reuven. They know the land didn't belong to Reuven. He didn't sell him anything. So by Shimon giving Reuven $1,000, for all intents and purposes, it appears like a loan. It appears like a loan. The word on the street may be, you know what? Shimon loaned Reuven $1,000 because he gave him $1,000. There was no transaction. Reuven didn't sell him anything. He didn't have anything to sell. So Shimon gave him $1,000, and then the word will come out. You know what? Reuven repaid him $1,100. Again, we're talking about, it's not written. It's not a sophisticated sort of real transaction where you can say, no, this is what happened. This is what happened. On the face of it, the rumor will start. You know what? He gave him 1,000, took back 1,100. He's a ganef. He's a gazlan. He's everything. He stole land. He took ribbis. I mean, they'll make ash and blata out of him. But it's at the end of the day, Shmuel says we prevent all of this by not allowing such a transaction to happen. Okay, and that's it's a Shmuel. That's his opinion, and we'll see that there's tremendous machlokes over this. So obviously, Shmuel's words had some impact because he laid down the law. He said you can't do it. Okay. So now. Okay, so that's where we are. So now the Gemara is going to ask a question on Rav Nachman. Rava is going to ask a question of Nachman from a Mishnah in Gittin. I'll read the Mishnah, and then we're going to go into the Mishnah for a little bit, because the Mishnah is very important for us to understand. What is the kasha? Esvei Rava or Rav Nachman? Rava asks a kasha Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel that you cannot make this transaction because of ribbis. He asks him a kasha. There's a Mishnah that says as follows: Ein motzian lachilas peiros. You cannot. We'll see what this is very cryptic. Ein motzian lachilas peiros. You cannot take money for eating of peiros. And Rashi says mafarshal lekaman. We'll explain later on. Uleshevach kakos, and for the improvement of land. Ulemazon ha'isha v'habonos, and for the sustenance of a woman and her children from a ksuba. From a ksuba, all these things you cannot collect minachosim mishubadim, from pledged land, mitnei tikkun ha'olam, because of tikkun olam. What's going on over here? What's going on is, very simply, that a person sells a piece of property. Reuven sells a piece of property to Shimon. Turns out that the transaction, and he pledged that he would make good. Turns out the sale was improper. He was a goslin. Okay, it was improper. Shimon then and Reuven had a piece of land that he sold to Levi. Reuven had a piece of land he sold to Levi. Comes Shimon, and so comes Levi, and he says to Shimon, I'm taking my land back. Okay. Shimon then goes to Yehuda, who bought the land from Reuven, and says, Yehuda, I'm collecting the land of the value that I paid to Reuven. Reuven doesn't have the money anymore. And he wanted, and it was with Achrayus. So Shimon, who is unfortunately the guy stuck, goes to Yehuda and says, Yehuda, the piece of land that Reuven sold you for $1,000, it's mine. I'm taking it back because I have to collect back what I paid Reuven for the land that turned out to be forged. It turned out to be stolen. That's the circumstance. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, that that piece of, let's just say that in the meantime, Shimon improved the land. He paid $200 or $100 to improve the land that was stolen, right? He got to collect that $100. Where's he going to collect it from? He wants to collect it from Yehuda. Yehuda has a piece of land for $1,000, but it's only worth $1,000. So he's going to go to Yehuda and say, Yehuda, you owe me $1,100. You, Yehuda, owe me $1,100. I can't collect it from Reuven. Reuven doesn't have 2 nickels. So now you have that piece of land. I want to collect from you the money that I spent for Shavach, or the money that I spent for the Ksuba, you name it. Whatever I spent, I'm collecting from you. Says the Mishnah, Mipnei Tikkun Olam, in order to if we would allow Shimon to collect sums of money from Yehuda for things not having to do with the land, then we would stop commerce, because Yehuda would never buy a piece of land. No one would buy from anybody else if they will be exposed to possible damages that they never could have contemplated. Yehuda never contemplated that he would have to pay because there was a ksuba, and the wife and the daughters ate from the ksuba $500 worth. Now you're going to come to me and collect from me because I bought a piece of land from Reuven. Now I'm going to be responsible to pay for Paris, for Shvach, for Ksuba. Are you kidding? Then no one will ever buy a piece of land. Says the Mishnah, Mipnei Tikkun Olam, because of the way of the world. In other words, in order to not to chill commerce, we're not going to allow someone to collect from pledged land for any of these things. For any of these things. Okay? That's the Gemara. Okay, we understand. That's the Mishnah. So we understand the Mishnah. All right, let's take a look at the Mishnah itself, because I have the Mishnah in Gittin. We'll go over this so we understand what's going on over here. It says the Mishnah as follows. Because we don't know what Achilas Paris is, Rashi says we don't know. So let's just say this. Ein Metzia Achilas Paris. So the pshat is here. Achilas Paris. All right, so I'm going to read as follows. This is from the Bar Tanur. Going to Gozel Adam Soda Mechavero, Umoches Soda La'acher. Okay, Reuven steals a piece of a land from Shimon, and he sells it, and he sells it to Shimon. V'zara, v'tzamcha, v'asa Paris, and he produces a whole orchard full of oranges or whatever. Choza halokeach al hamocher. Now it's taken away from him. So the lokeach goes back to the seller, the Goslin, but go over mimeno as demea karka, and he can collect the demea karka afmash min chosim mishubadim. So in other words, if Reuven sold this piece of land, another piece of land to Yehuda, then Shimon can go to Yehuda and collect the land because he has a shtar mishubad. He has a pledged document. Okay. But But if he built up an orchard worth $500, that he cannot collect. That he can only collect from the Goslin himself, from that which Reuven has, not that which Reuven sold to Yehuda. That was pledged, and Yehuda knew it was pledged. So he knew that it was pledged land, and he bought it nevertheless. Okay, that you can take, but you can't take for Paris. He fertilized it or planted or whatever. Right? That's what our Rashi says. Okay, and the same thing with Lamazon Isha Bahabanos Shetanai Ksubahu, because the Ksuba has a Tanai Sha'ahalmana Nizonas Menichse Habal, that the Almana can continue if a husband dies, the ksuba is intact and she can collect from the land of the Baal. Also children until they're married can collect from the ksuba. So who would they collect from? They're going to go to the land that Yehuda has and they're going to collect. So Yehuda, the poor Yehuda who bought a piece of land for $1,000 now can own thousands of dollars in improvements, in ksuba. If he's not protected, there will never be a purchaser. So that's pshat tikkun olam. Tikkun olam means that you prevent anybody from collecting more than the value of the land. So that's what Rashi here says. We'll look at Rashi. If they tikkun olam, she'im ata omer yitrufu lekuchos al kach, that you can collect from the buyer all of these things. Ein loch adam shalokech sodom chavero. No one will ever buy a field from his friends. Why? Because there's nobody that doesn't have a obligation. It's a never-ending story because nichsei ksuba is ongoing for life. It's uncertain how much that would be. It could be $100. It could be $1,000. And the buyers don't know to protect themselves. So therefore, if you're going to allow it to be done, all right, fine. Okay. So that's pshat here in that Mishnah, right? So now Rabbi asks Rav Nachman. We see a Mishnah that says you can't collect. So back to the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Mishabadihu delo mafkinan. Only from Mishubadim you can collect. But from Bnei Chorin, from unencumbered land, you can collect. Says the Gemara now, Ktani Miha. Now what does that Mishnah say? The Shevach Kakos, that when you improve land, my lav, Belokeach Megazlin. Aren't we talking about the same situation we were talking about before when you take it from a Goslin, right? So in other words, he stole it, he sold it to him, and Rav Nachman is saying in the name of Shmuel that you can collect. Wait a minute, how can you collect? It's ribis. Shmuel says you can't collect from shvach because the shvach is ribis. Because a gezela is not a transaction, it's only a loan. And here in this Mishnah, you're telling me, and this is the name of Shmuel, right? So Rava is asking Rav Nachman, you said in the name of Shmuel that you can't collect shvach because of ribis. And here you're telling me this Mishnah in Gittin says that you can't collect all these things from the Chosim Mishubadim. But from Bnei Chorin, you can collect. How can you collect from Bnei Chorin? It's ribis. Right? Because the Goslin from his own pocket will have to pay. He can't make the third person pay because of the protection tikkun olam, but you can collect from the Goslin. If you can collect from the Goslin, then it's ribis. Same kasha. So this is the kasha Esvei on Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says in the name of Shmuel that you can't collect, and from this Mishnah we see that you can collect, and l'chayre it's ribis. That's his kasha.
Are you saying ribis or the appearance of ribis?
Again, everything is appearance. Everything is appearance, and that's an important distinction. You're right, but it looks like ribis. The classic case of ribis is where I lend you $1,000 and I charge you interest and you pay me back. That's that's of course ribis. Here, it will appear that he's collecting on his loan because he made him a loan, and to all intents and purposes, he is getting back more than he gave him. So on the surface, anybody who sees it, it looks like ribis. It's the classic case of ribis to the appearance. So the Gemara has, so this is a problem. Emfrit the Gemara low. The Mishnah in Gittin is not speaking about a Goslin, but Bal Chov. It's speaking about a Bal Chov. What does that mean? It means not that he stole the land, but that he owes money to someone, and that Bal Chov is coming to collect. So there's no sale involved, and there's no halva involved. He sold him a piece of land. The sale was a valid sale. The Bal Chov is coming to collect from the seller, from the Goslin. So now it's no longer Mechzik Ribis, because there was no halva. The only reason why we're saying Mechzik Ribis is because there was a halva. Why was there halva? Because it was stolen. So there could not have been a sale. There had to have been a loan, and the loan engenders ribis. So the appearance of ribis is because of the loan. Once we're saying there's no longer a loan, it was a legitimate sale. He sold him the land. It was his, but he owed money to a creditor. The creditor came, the Bal Chov came and took the land away from Shimon. Shimon comes to Reuven and says, what did you do? I bought a piece of land for $1,000. I improved it. Give me $1,100. No question of ribis anymore, because it was a sale, not a loan. So that's how the Gemara answers the kasha, that it's speaking about a Bal Chov. Says Rashi. Okay, so I think so. Okay, so there's no Rashi here right now. Okay, so that's what he answers it. Bal Chov. Frek the Gemara. Bal Chov. If our Gemara is speaking about a Bal Chov, when I say our Gemara, the Mishnah in Gittin that lists those things, Peris, Shvach, Ksuba, those things. If it's speaking about a Bal Chov and not a Goslin, like the Gemara, Iba Bal Chov, Ema Reisha. Let's look at the rest of that, the first part of that Mishnah. What's the first part of the Mishnah? Ein Mitzian La'achilas Peris. Right? What does the Mishnah say? You can't collect Achilas Peris, Shevach Charkos, and Mozon Isha. So Shevach Charkos, the middle one, is the one we discussed. So if you're saying that that's not speaking about a Goslin, it's speaking about a Bal Chov, let's go back to the first case. The first case was Achilas Peris. What is Achilas Peris now that we understand it? Achilas Peris means that you grew you grew pears, an orchard, oranges, whatever. You grew them on the land, and now they're fully flourishing, and you've got plenty of fruit. Frank the Gemara. V'i Bal Chov mi isale peri. Does a Bal Chov get peris? Omar Shmuel says Bal Chov goves a shevach, that the Bal Chov can collect the shevach. Shevach in avol peris lo. So the pshat there is that when a Bal Chov wants to come collect, the Gemara says he can collect from shevach, but he can't collect from peris. Why? So, okay, so we have to look at Rashi. Let's skip to the Rashi. We'll go back, but look at the Rashi. Lachilas peris solkadat chaymeir b'sadeh shetorfu. This is the third wide line. Hameir b'sadeh shetorfu melea peris me'ad lokeach. That the owner is coming back and he is taking shetorfu. He's taking a land full of peris. V'chozo lokeach ligvos min hamocher, and now the lokeach has to go back to the mocher and collect. The mishetarfa Bal Chov mi islay le Bal Chov peris gemurin hamachubarim bekarka. Does the rightful owner collect the fruit that from the land. No, when you have pears, ripe pears that are now, I mean, you can pick them and eat them. They're no longer gaining anything from the ground. While they're growing, they're usurping the ground. They're taking nourishment from the ground. You can say it belongs to the ground. But once pears are ripe and mature, they're on their own. They're no longer part of the ground. So he's making a distinction that on pears, when the lokeach, when the real owner comes back and says, I'm taking my land back, he can't take the pears. He's not allowed to have the pears. The pears are not his. All that's his is the land. That's pshat in the Gemara, that the Baal Chov cannot collect pears. So if he can't collect pears, says the Gemara, says the Elapshit begezel Baal Chov goves a shvach in avo pears lo. So how can that Gemara be speaking about a gazlan, a Baal Chov? Because remember, we answered the Gemara by saying, no, we're not speaking about a gazel, because that would be ribbis. We're speaking about a Baal Chov. It's a little bit twisted, so we have to follow here. We thought we're speaking about a case of gzela. It turns out it can't be gzela, because then there would be ribbis. Answers the Gemara that Mishnah that talks about ein motziin is by improvement of the karka, has to be speaking about a Baal Chov. And a Baal Chov, there's no ribbis because it was a regular transaction. Comes the Gemara and asks the kasha, if we're speaking about a Baal Chov, then we should be speaking about Baal Chov in the Reisha. The Reisha is speaking about when you can't collect from fruit. But wait a minute, there's a Beferish Gemara that says a Baal Chov can't collect from the fruit because the fruit have nothing to do with the karka. So this Baal Chov, who now comes back and says, this is my land, okay, now the nigzal comes, this is my land, so the buyer goes back to the gazla, to the first guy, I'm calling him a gazla, goes back to the first guy and says, you owe me for the shvach, right? You owe me for the shvach. So why can't I collect it from the chosim mishabadim? Of course I can collect it from the chosim mishabadim. So therefore, this is a kasha. So we have a problem here.
But
it can't be a Baal Chov.
But that cycle of, let's say it's a one season set of payros that happen every year, the original owner lost out on his payros.
Yeah, but it's as if he never had them. In other words, he's not entitled to something that he wouldn't have had. Let's say no one improved. No. Let's say no one improved the land.
Right.
So his land is fine. I mean, the fact that you grow produce doesn't take away from the land. Next year can produce again, right? It doesn't make the land worse. It's just you missed that cycle.
Right.
Okay, so a Baal Chov cannot collect. That's the halacha. A Baal Chov cannot collect from ripe peiros because it's not part of the land. I know you're going to say it's not fair, he could have, but that doesn't come into the equation. What comes into the equation is you got your land back, yes. You're not entitled to more than what you had. You have land, now you have land. The fact that there is ripe, if it's not ripe, it's different, Jay. If it's not ripe, then it's still drawing sustenance from the land, then he can claim it. But if it's not drawing sustenance from the land anymore because it's ripe, he can't claim it. That's what the Gemara means.
That's the difference, yeah.
Right, there's a difference, right. So now, so therefore, so what is he saying? Mi isle pere. Does he collect the peiros? Shvachin peiros lo. So how can that Mishnah say he can collect peiros, that you can't collect peiros from the chosim mishabadim, but you can collect peiros from bnei chorin, meaning you can go back to the first guy, and say, you owe me $1,000, and now you owe me for the value of the peiros. How can you owe for the value of the peiros? A Baal Chov can't collect. A Baal Chov can't collect. So that's the good. So it's a stira. In other words, if you're going to say it's a gazlan, it's ribbis. If you're going to say it's a Baal Chov, we don't understand the Mishnah because you can't collect on peiros. So okay, so Gemara gives an answer. Elapshita begazel v'nigzel. No. We're going back to our original theory that we're talking about gazela. We're talking about where it was stolen and everything came out of that. Right. Umidaresha begozel v'nigzel, sefer nami gozel v'nigzel. Then the sefer has to be gozel v'nigzel. So both of them are speaking about gezela. Midi area but then you're going to ask a kasha if it's gezela. Then we're back to the original question of ribis, right? In other words, if you want to make it uniform, you wanted to make it uniform that it was gezel. No, can't be. So then we're going to say it's speaking about balchov. It can't be either because by balchov you're not allowed to collect. So we're going to go back to gezel, right? We're going to go back to gezel. So the Manav Shach, you have a problem. Either it's gezel and you have a stira on Shmuel because it's ribis, or you say it's balchov and then you have a kasha because you can't collect payers. So the Gemara gives an answer, and again, only the Gemara can give this answer. He says, "Ha kedeisa v'hai kedeisa." All right, take a look at Rashi. Hai kedeisa v'hai kedeisa. I'm skipping to the Rashis. Reisha benigzel v'sefer b'balchov. In other words, we're going to have to fit the teretz to the kasha. So basically, the case of Paris, that's speaking about a balchov. The case of Shvach, rather, the case of Paris is speaking about a nigzel. The case of Shvach is speaking about balchov. So in other words, we're splitting the baby. We're saying it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be half and half. Part of that Mishnah was speaking about a Gazlan who sold it, and part of the Mishnah is speaking about a Balchov who sold it. I mean, it's kind of the easy way out when you don't have an answer. You split it and you say, but that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara said. So basically, he didn't have a real answer. In other words, it isn't uniform. You can't have it both ways. Because either if you're going to say it's a Gazlan, then you're going to have the ribis problem. And if you're going to say it's a Balchov, then you're going to have the collection problem because the Gemara says that a Balchov can't collect from payers. Okay, so he makes a pshara and says, Hi Kedisa, Hi Kedisa. All right, so let's finish up, look at the Rashis. We'll go back. My lab lokech sada megazlan v'hishbicha, and he improved it. Ubo nigzel v'torfa chozol lokech v'go v'kerem min ha-mocher afilu min ha-chosim mishubadim shamocha acha mechira zu d'shtaro shal zeh kodem shekasa bo achrayis. So he can collect from the original, from the Gazlan, he can collect the property because he gave him a shtar achrayis. V'hashevach min ha-chosim b'nei chorim v'lo mishubadim. But he cannot collect the shevach from nechasim mishubadim for the reason that we said, because then it's going to become problematic, and no one will want to ever buy a piece of property. You never were able to evaluate the shevach at the time of the sale, because when he took achrayis upon himself, he never figured that it would be an unlimited amount of money. Alma isla lokeach shevach migazlan. Therefore, the shevach has to come from the Gazlan from Bnei Chorin. And then he says, Lo b'balchov, shenitra for balchov mimenu b'shvil chovo v'lo gezula. Oisa, dahi vade islay shavcha, the memechira ma'ayasihi, kol zman shelo tarfa mimenu, shimpora hamocha ma'osav, lebalchov, harihu misulak min alakuchos. So in other words, by balchov, there is no longer a problem of open-endedness, because there it's finite. I mean, it's not, you can't just collect forever. In the case of Balchov, there is no loan, there's actual karka. It doesn't even look like ribis. It doesn't even look like ribis because it's a simple case of, I sold you a piece of land, the land was taken back, you have to give me for the improvements. No one's going to say, he's taking more than he's entitled to. Of course he's taking more than he's entitled to because he did the work. And the work has nothing to do with ribis, right? Because it's a transaction, not a loan. Lachilas Paris, Solkadat, Chaimira Bisada, Shatarfu, Malaya Paris, like we said before, Miada Lokeach, because of Lokeach Ligvos, Benamocher, the Ibishatarfa Balchov, Miaslela Balchov, Paris Gemur. Here, Paris Gemur Hamuchubarim Bekarka, Ve'enet Srichin Leklarka Klum. They are mature Paris. They don't need sustenance from the land. Sheyachal Latarfa, that you can grab them separately. Goves a Shevach. In that case, you can collect the Shevach. Karka Torif Miad Lokeach Kamo Shahayu Mishubechas Lokeach. All right. So, and then the other Rashi we said. So basically, we're left with this Gemara that there are two different sort of lines. One has to do with Gezel, one has to do with Bal Chayv. And in the Mishnah, where Shmuel even says in that Mishnah that you can't collect from the Mechasim Mishubadim, what he means to say is that in one instance, you can't collect from the Mechasim Mishubadim and Bnei Chorin because you're talking about a Gazlan and you can't collect because it's Ribis. And in the other case, you can't collect because there's a halacha that a Baal Chov can't collect Paris. So basically, each part of that Mishnah is dealing with a different set of facts, which allows it to happen. I mean, there are times when the Gemara has to sort of split the baby because there's no uniformity here. There's not one case that fits all where we can say, yes, that this case has all of these circumstances. So again, we haven't finished with this Gemara. We'll pick it up later. But for our purposes, that's how we have to come out, that we're talking about two different cases and two different outcomes. It's a little complicated, a little convoluted, but ultimately the Gemara comes out to what it feels is a satisfactory conclusion.
Oh.
All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah, we'll have to back up a little bit next week and we'll pick up from here, Mr. Shah.
Like you said, only the Gemara could say that.
Only the Gemara can do that. we don't have license to be able to make those differences. I mean, on the face of it, you would think so, but we can't do it. All right. But by the way, David, the mechze is still something we're going to talk about. We haven't yet concluded the question of mechze, of appearances.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Gaya.
Thank you.
So next week.
All right.
Go ahead.